this time it's just the two of us again. So let's chat about the Bowral case. This baby is all yours. Go for it, James.
I think, listening back on this now, Gunnar, we've had a bit of a listen back to our chat. And the main thing I wanted to say is, well, nobody can accuse us of not living up to our promise to our listeners to be candid and open and vulnerable, because that's very much what we were in this chat. And I feel like that's definitely what I was in this chat. And yeah, I hope people enjoy a bit of an insight and a bit of honest reflection and vulnerability, because you don't actually hear that very often in our industry. I think everyone puts so much emphasis on wanting to be, right and to know exactly what they're saying all the time and never show any weakness. But sometimes we just deal with stuff that is difficult, or we don't know the best way forward.
I was quite surprised. Again, I do the post-processing and the cutting by listening to it. I mean, I did not know. We never plan these things. People may already figured that one out. But this one I quite enjoyed listening to. Because we definitely show a bit of a vulnerable side to us personally, and also as for pillars. So I liked it. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, me too. And I hope our listeners enjoy it. And, this, like with everything, I mean, we're always happy to hear people's feedback or comments and that sort of thing. So if you liked hearing that other side of things, please let us know.
Right. And here we come.
So we wanted to talk today about the recent prosecution at the Bowral Landfill. We mentioned this a few episodes ago, where one of our listeners raised it with us as an interesting prosecution outcome, and they were questioning whether the penalty that was assigned was actually enough of a deterrent. I guess, people say crime doesn't pay, but in this case, I think crime did pay. And, a very fair question was raised is like, are these penalties enough? Ultimately, the penalties that are getting handed down are still a matter for the courts, right? So they're still the ones who are assigning the penalties. So anyway, we just thought it would be interesting because I've been involved in that site for a long, long time, and we were involved in that whole process through the EPA's investigation and ultimately prosecution as a bystander, I might add. So I'll explain kind of what our involvement was. When I say our, I mean, it was mostly mine, but Four Pillars was acting on behalf of that client for a period of time. There were a few learnings that I've taken from that I thought might be interesting for people to hear about.
So we're talking the landfill in Bowral, right next to the brickworks there.
Yeah. So the landfill in Bowral, and I want to stress before we get into it, it's changed hands since this prosecution was on foot. The owners who own it now obviously had nothing to do with what happened there in the past, and none of what we're going to say today reflects on the current owners in any way. But yeah, it's a small landfill. It's about 1 million cubic meters worth of base. It's, like you said, Gunnar, attached to the brickwork. So it's the old quarry where they pulled all their clay and shale out. They created a big hole in the ground, and then they've got to fill it up with something. So,
you mentioned it's a small landfill. This already makes me laugh, because when you took me down to the Bowral Landfill one day, I'm standing at the edge of this hole in the ground. Yeah. And I'm thinking, holy macro, this is huge. It's just a gigantic hole in the ground. And it's just a small landfill.
You're right. In the big scheme of things, it is a small one, but yeah, it certainly doesn't feel small when you're there. Like, it's 35 meters deep to the bottom of the pit. And like I said, it's about 1 million cubic meters worth of void space. And the brickworks took about 30 years to dig it out. And it's been a landfill since, the early 2000s, I think it was. It became a landfill. And so basically the background of my involvement there, when I first left uni, I actually went to work for Brickworks, and they own that Bowral brick site. So my involvement with the landfill started straight away. That was in about 2009. That's when the Brickworks owned it. It was really being operated at a very small scale. And then in around about 2017, I think it was, the landfill changed hands into the ownership of the people who subsequently were prosecuted by the EPA. By 2017, Four Pillars had been created, and due to my long involvement in the site, the people who purchased the site wanted to keep me on and keep my involvement because I had all that corporate knowledge of the site. So me and Four Pillars got involved through that way.
I think we can mention the owner's name. I mean, it's publicly known.
Yeah. So Ibi El Mustafa was the director of the company that owned the land. And Ibi was one of the key people that I dealt with day to day at that time. What I won't say in this pod is make any kind of personal comments about Ibi or anybody else who was involved, because I don't think it was appropriate. And I also don't have any ill will of any kind towards them. The interesting thing is, on a day-to-day basis, Ibi and the other people involved in that site were actually extremely pleasant people to work with. They were always very polite and courteous to us. They never asked me or anybody else to do anything unethical or outside of what we were meant to be doing. So certainly on a personal level, my experience with them was great.
Yeah, I was about to say that. So I met Ibi only twice, I think. One of those two meetings was when the negotiations between him selling the landfill and the current owners was going on. And I was part of that meeting. Exactly what you just said. He is such a nice, courteous person. And I must say, I mean, I walked away from that meeting because, okay, there's EB and there's the new purchasers, right? All of them super, super successful business people. I have just some inherent admiration for people who manage to build big businesses.
Yeah.
And it was so funny. So there's this, and they're standing at the landfill. The meeting was there. There's these three people, very successful people. And they have some questions. It's like, how about this and how about that? And EB says, oh, well, it's this and that. But the numbers they were throwing around, if it didn't have six figures, it didn't even enter.
Yeah.
Right? They say, oh, how much is this going to cost? It's like 1 or 2 million. Yeah, in that order. And that's about it,
Yeah.
Maybe a few $100,000 more. I'm in the meeting and thinking, I wonder if I'm going to get away with charging $350 or $380 an hour.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny, isn't it? You say this all the time, is that often our fees, environmental consultant fees, often are a rounding error on big development projects. And you're 100% right. These are the numbers involved in even a small waste site, multi-million-dollar site. And I'm with you. I think, it sort of boggles the mind a little bit when with what we normally deal with. But yeah, so I'm glad you sort of feel the same way. I think I'm going to comment on, I guess, what happened. Yeah, and I think it goes to the fact that people are not two-dimensional. Like, there's complexity to people. You can be a very nice and genuine and generous person, but unfortunately still do the wrong thing or make some bad choice. That was interesting because certainly we've worked with clients in the past who do the wrong thing and are also very nasty people.
Yeah.
I don't have any respect for those kinds of people, but I still have a lot of respect for Ibi as a person. So so I won't say anything more about kind of him or anybody else personally, but we can talk about the facts and I guess what went down. So just to recap for anyone who hasn't seen it, there's maybe we can put a link in the show notes, Gunnar, just for the summary of the judgment. Essentially, what happened was that the operators took in around 14,000 tons of additional waste than what was reported to the EPA. So these sites have to report to the EPA every month how much came in, how much went out, and whatever the net balance in, they pay the waste levy on that, $170 odd, whatever it is now. So levy avoidance can be a big financial gain. And a lot of the EPA's work that they do is around stopping people avoiding the levy. That's actually a huge part of their work.
Explain the levy to people.
So the levy is an economic instrument that is meant to put a price on sending waste to landfill so that other means of dealing with waste, like recycling and reuse and anything that avoids it going to landfill, becomes more price competitive.
Okay. Hang on a second. Let me help you out. You're not a regulator here.
Help me out here, Gunnar.
Let me put the layman in here, all right?
Please.
Economic instrument. Okay. If you want to chuck some stuff into a landfill, if it is classified as a waste and it is not exempt, if you want to throw stuff into a landfill, you go there, you throw 5 tons of material into a landfill. As long as it stays in that landfill, every ton that you take there incurs a waste levy. Of how much is it these days?
It's about $174, I think. It goes up each year.
Pay at the gate, you pay, I don't know, for general solid waste, you probably pay something along
$280.
something like that, right? $280. 170 of those go straight to the EPA. The way how that is enforced is by weighbridge data. So the trucks enter. If you ever have gone to a landfill, you will see that there is no way in other than going over a weighbridge. So you go in and there's high definition cameras that read the license plates. You go in, license plate gets recorded and the weight gets recorded. Drive around the landfill, dispose everything that you have, drive out. There's another weighbridge and another high definition camera. And at the gate, the person hands you a receipt and a bill. You have to submit this weighbridge data to the EPA and they see how much was deposited and charge $170 something for every ton that you have taken in.
Yeah.
And you can already see this is highly tempting to somehow bypass. So if you can charge people $280 a ton and not pay the EPA the waste levy, that's a highly, highly profitable endeavor.
Yeah. You would increase your margin 5 times. Yeah, so there was about 430 truckloads that weren't put over the weighbridge and weren't included in the reporting to the EPA. So 430 truckloads, about 14,000 tons. The financial benefit that the owners got at that time would be 14,000 tons times, even if it was $150. That's around $2.1 million worth of levy avoided.
Yeah,
by the operator. And so that's really the crux of it. I can't remember how the investigation was triggered. The main way that the EPA tries to verify that the reports that they get each month from a landfill are correct is through what are called volumetric surveys. Have you dealt with them much, Gunnar?
Hardly at all, only marginally as part of the down there in Bowral when I helped out, yes.
The issue with volumetric surveys is that they're very crude tools. They take a measurement of the change in volume in the landfill, and then they try and correlate that with the tonnages that have been reported over a particular period. Now, obviously, the issue there is that you're taking a volume measurement and you're trying to correlate it with a mass measurement. And anyone who's ever tried to convert between the two knows that there's a very, very wide range of error if you don't have any information about density. And obviously, in the landfill, density varies a lot.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. Everybody in our industry knows that. That's a known problem.
Yeah. And this is the EPA's main tool to verify the information that they've been given, right? So they're working with something that makes it a bit hard for them. So I don't know exactly what twigged the EPA to look into this, but I think it was actually a different matter that made them look into this a bit more. They commenced an investigation and then ultimately it was several years later, we're talking from a 4-year period that this investigation was underway. And the penalty that was handed down was a fine to the director of $263,000 and an order to pay EPA's costs, which were about $145,000. So we're talking, just over $400,000 worth of penalties handed down with and a saving of $0.1 million. So
a theoretical saving of $2.1 million, right? The saving was theoretical.
Yes, theoretically, yeah.
Also based on, and this is I did not know that they did the volumetric survey, because what they do there is they fly drones over the landfill that takes depth measurements.
Yeah.
I have mentioned how incredibly big that hole is. Look, I don't know if I'm allowed to, but we can discuss it later, but if I'm allowed to, I put up a photo in the show notes of this landfill.
I think that's fine, yeah.
It is huge. And 14,000 cubic meters, or 14,000 tons, sorry, would disappear in that hole.
Absolutely.
That just disappears. It's not even a rounding error. Right? So I find it amazing that a volumetric survey, I would argue that you can't determine that, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, I would argue the same. And I'll come back to that when I talk about our involvement in the site and what we knew and what we should have, what people claim that we should have known. To that point about, there was a theoretical saving of $2.1 million of levy that wasn't paid. And the ultimate penalty was, just over $400,000. Plus they would have had to pay their lawyers. So call it, $150,000 there. So we're talking about $500,000 worth of costs. In theory, walking away with about $1.5 million worth of making $1.5 million out of the whole thing. I don't know that I have too much to say about that really, but the question was raised by one of our listeners is that enough of a deterrent? Because there's still a very significant financial benefit that's been made there.
Mm-hmm.
In theory. And even Gunnar, when we were doing some prep for this pod, and we summarized the case with ChatGPT, wasn't it? And
it was Copilot, yes.
Copilot, I think, had the same point, which was, does this serve as an effective deterrent from people trying to avoid waste levies?
I do know that Copilot, the sentence it said is, the waste levy serves as an economic tool to encourage recycling and attempts to undermine efforts to reduce landfill waste. And I'm like, oh, come on. It's like you are a shield for the EPA here. We can discuss whether the waste levy actually discourages people from or reduces landfill waste. This is it's certainly a contention here, but never mind.
Yeah, that's it. So there's a few other things I think that I'd like to talk to that are more about like the learnings that I took away from this whole thing. But there's financial benefit here of about $1.5 million after you take into account all of this. So, I'll let people kind of draw their own conclusions about whether the penalty was good enough. The only other thing I guess I'd say in terms of like the cost on someone who goes through something like this is that you can imagine that being under investigation for 4 years of your life and all of the ups and downs and interviews and letters and legal letters you're receiving and meetings with your lawyers. Like, there is definitely a human toll that comes with that, that can't be costed, but it's up to an individual, I guess, as to whether they think that human toll is worth $1.5 million to them or not. Did you have anything you want to add to that, Gunnar?
No, this is easy to say, this is really tough. I remember you being seriously involved. I don't know what it did to you mentally, but I remember the time involvement was staggering for you.
Yeah, it was.
You're EB in this case, and I don't know how easily he brushes something like this off, but yes, that is a toll. But mind you, that's part of the judicial system that we have. It's like,
for sure,
we accuse you of something, you defend yourself, and if that's tough on you, well, so be it.
Well, that's right. And in this case, we had someone who ended up pleading guilty and who obviously has admitted to doing the wrong thing. And so you sort of, it is what it is. Like, you accept that's going to happen when you make that choice to do the wrong thing, right? So I would like to talk a little bit about my involvement and that toll that it takes on people who are caught up in an investigation but are not the subject of it and haven't done the wrong thing, because that is worth noting.
Okay.
When these things happen, like there's a lengthy investigation process. EPA investigators who tend to be ex-police a lot of the time, so skilled investigative people, skilled in conducting interviews and looking at evidence and that sort of thing. It's the same as any investigation. They cast a wide net and they say, look, we think something wrong has happened here. Who is the kind of the key suspect? Who else is kind of involved? And then they sort of have that net and they go out and start talking to people. And usually the way these starts is with information, like a request for information and records. And so that's how it started for us, is that we received a notice from the EPA saying, we need you to provide all this information to us. And that was fine. There's no issue complying with that sort of thing. But like you said, Gunnar, the time demands on that. I don't have it in front of me. We must have spent, I reckon, 150 hours or more putting together the information, because it was very, very extensive information that EPA asked for. You multiply that by, the billable rates of the people involved. Like, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars of opportunity cost for Pillars as a business that, me as the director has to wear. You could kind of look at that as the cost of doing business, but that sort of thing is not something we typically factor into our hourly rates. It does become quite stressful if those things drag on. After that, I then had to attend several interviews, like personal interviews, where I would go to the EPA's, or I would go to an office location, and I would have to sit down, and I would sit there for 2 or 3 hours, and the investigator would grill me with pages and pages of questions about our involvement in the site, what happened, who did what, who knew what. They are just exhausting. And even if you haven't done the wrong thing, there's somebody like me who hasn't really been in that situation much, who tends to, has kept their nose very clean. It's stressful. It's incredibly stressful, and it makes you concerned, even though you've done nothing wrong. Yeah, that went on for a long period of time, actually. And then it all sort of died down, and the EPA looks through all the information they have before they make a call about what to do. I cooperated with the EPA in providing a statement that's, I've lost the words, a statement that's presented as evidence in court.
Mm-hmm.
That's an optional thing. So the EPA requested that I did that basically to verify the information that I'd given them. And that's optional. I could have said no to that, but they would probably have then had to call me as a witness in the court case.
Oof, yeah.
Right. So what I decided to do was to opt in and to actually provide the EPA with a statement. And I think the information that I gave in my statement actually ended up being fairly central to the outcome of the case. We kind of went from, I guess, being a person of interest in the investigation to being seen as like a good source of information the EPA would then use to target the person they thought was responsible, if that makes sense.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
I assumed almost innocently here that you were being paid for that, but you were not. Is that right?
No.
Oh.
I mean, at that point, we're no longer working for the client. They'd sold the site. We had no means to recoup any of those costs.
Ouch.
It definitely hurts. Like, it hurts the bottom line for sure, and it takes people away from doing other things. And yeah, like I said, it is what it is. We have to wear it. So the best thing I can think is that I look back on it and I think, well, I did actually learn a lot. It was, as stressful as it was a good experience. It's an experience that a lot of people haven't had. So I guess I'm kind of lucky in a way that, I've been through that. There were a few things that I might touch on that might be of interest to our listeners, right? So especially those who are in consulting, I think that one of the things that was raised was about, whether I should have known that something like this was going on.
Sorry, who raised that question?
EPA. Because essentially the situation was that, we weren't on site all the time. We're consultants, right? So we would go to site maybe once a month to do monitoring work and that sort of thing. And we had a role in basically collating the weighbridge data and reporting it to the EPA. So that was part of our services. And so we were reporting data every month to the EPA, and we were given raw weighbridge files every month to do that. And one of the questions the EPA asked was that, you're being provided information, you've got eyes on the site, how did you not know that this sort of thing was happening, right? Basically questioning our decision-making, our integrity.
Okay.
And, the thing I said was what you said earlier on, Gunnar, which is like, well, look, we're not there. We're there maybe once a month. We don't see what goes on there on a day-to-day basis. The only tool that we have to verify the monthly data is the volumetric surveys, which are highly inaccurate. And so everything was within the range of variation on volumetric surveys. So we had no red flags. We had nothing that would make us suspect that anything was being done wrong.
Well, there's so much to be said about this. How much as the consultants are we supposed to police things?
It's a really good question. Like, if I do become aware of a client doing something that is not right, my approach is typically to try and give them a solution and say, look, here's how I think you could maybe achieve the same outcome, but do it in a compliant way. And then if the client continues to choose to ignore that advice, then we've got a decision to make as consultants as to whether that's a client we want to work with long term. But other than that, that's pretty much all we can do. We can terminate our work with a client, but beyond that, there's not really too much we can do directly.
Yeah, I don't even know what our role as consultants is supposed to be in this case, legally or even ethically.
I guess what we definitely wouldn't do is report data to the EPA that we knew was false.
Yeah, well, that's different. That would be a wrongdoing on our side.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if we knew that something was going on there, what are our... Look, I don't know what the obligations are. I'll give you an example. So if I take my car to the service, right? And these cars record just about anything these days. So you take it there and they look at the data available, and they see the latest data where you drove, or when I drove from my house to Artarmon, where my mechanic is, right? And they see that I reached the top speed of 110. Which, right? They can see that. Would, in this case, I don't know, would BMW have an obligation to report that to someone?
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of what a similar situation we would be in.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I don't know. Maybe we get some feedback. I don't know what we would have to do.
I'm with you. I actually think that's actually an episode in itself, honestly. But those kinds of questions that we grapple with all the time, to do another episode on that, actually, on kind of the ethics and integrity side of things, for sure. Because it's not always clear.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of verifying client information, right? That's the point I wanted to make. Is that EPA's question to us about, how we were reporting numbers and how were we confident in those numbers? Like, what work were we doing to verify that? And that was a fair point. I think in that instance, we couldn't really do much more than we did. But I think the point remains that as consultants, we often rely on information that's given to us in good faith from our clients. We rely on that in good faith. And I think that we need to keep in mind that we do have a responsibility to verify as best that we can. I know there's been instances in the past with consultants who have produced audit reports and that sort of thing, relying on client information that turned out to be incorrect. So yeah, it's hard to know when to draw the line, but I think the learning there is as best you can, as best as practical. We need to try and verify what clients are giving to us.
Yeah.
The other point that I think is important is that not signing off on regulatory matters in lieu of your client. The monthly reports that would go to the EPA, even though we prepared them, we drafted them, we did not certify or sign off on them. That was all done by the licensee, and that's the appropriate thing to do.
Yes.
And it was a real lesson. If, for instance, I had signed off on those reports and lodged them with the EPA, I was the one who was verifying that they were correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you can see where that would have led.
Yeah.
So that would have been a massive, massive issue if we had done that. So it's just a reminder, and this comes up a lot. It's easy for a client to say, if it is a regulatory submission or something, it's easy for them to say, look, can you just submit that on our behalf, right? And I think we need to be very careful when we're doing that and making it very clear as to what our role is. But ultimately, the client is the one who is submitting or signing off or lodging these kinds of things. One of the last learnings I had here was a pretty obvious one, which was just to make sure you have a really clear contract and scope with your client and to always keep detailed records, because we could demonstrate through our records and through the scope of our engagement and a range of other things what our involvement was and what was expected of us. And we actually used that to help demonstrate to the EPA that we shouldn't be caught up in the investigation and really had played no part in what went wrong. So that's a bit of a no-brainer, but it's worth mentioning. The other 2 points I had here in terms of learnings, I think are more questions. I still don't really know the answers to these questions, but I think I wanted to mention them. The first one is about a client's brand and decisions that we have to make about the people that we work with, and the way that a client's brand can kind of rub off on you as someone who's associated with them. So it's an interesting thing. There's a company that I follow on LinkedIn called JS Regulatory Services. Jason Scarborough, who's an ex-EPA officer, he writes some really nice articles, actually, and I'd actually love to talk to him on the pod in the future. He wrote a really interesting article about brand as an organization, and also I guess reputation is another word for it, for the people that you work with. It's a really interesting thing. I don't know what I think about it. I don't know if there is a clear answer for it, but there definitely is a decision to be made about how the reputation of a client kind of affects you when you choose to work with them. Do you have anything to sort of add to that, Gunnar? Like, it's a bit of it's.
Yeah. I don't know how much. It's difficult to know how you are seen as a company by others.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 things. How are we seen by our peers, by other environmental firms? That's one thing. And the other one is how are you seen by regulators, or in this case by the EPA mainly.
Yeah. And clients too, right, Gunnar?
Oh, and clients. How does being associated with, in our case, the waste industry, that's a big part of our business. We are dealing in the waste, in waste industry. And we know as a fact, and the EPA is very vocal about this and also very open about this, that there are problems in the waste industry. We know it. There is not a lot of trust from the EPA side as far as the waste industry is concerned. Hey, all the power to you. That's you probably right from the regulator side of things. So I get it all.
Yeah.
I would argue that as long as there is as everybody acts professionally and everybody acts, as long as there is mutual respect, and there's a lot of respect that we have for the regulators. There is no question about that. We may complain about them internally. We may complain about them sometimes on the podcast here, but there's an awful lot of respect for the people, and I think we have a great relationship.
Me too. But in those early days, there were definitely some comments made to me. I was involved in various committees and that sort of thing with the EPA, and people made comments either directly or indirectly to me saying, well, why is James, or why should James be involved in these kinds of things, considering the clients that he's working with?
Yeah, hang on. I know what you're referring to. You're referring to your involvement in the redrafting of the RROs.
Yes, that's right. So what we spoke about in the first episode, my involvement in those industry committees and in shaping that new legislation and that sort of thing. Yeah, it was questioned, why should he be allowed to be involved, considering the clients that he works with?
Yeah, because he knows a truckload. That's maybe one of the reasons.
Exactly. I was bringing value to those meetings. I was bringing
Notice how I said truckload and not shitload? Mm.
a truckload, yeah, not 440 loads. Um, those comments really didn't sit well with me. And I thought to myself at the time, I'm bringing value to this thing. I am bringing expertise to this thing. I'm always acting in a professional and ethical way, despite what you might think about my clients, right? Like that, their behavior is not my behavior. The engagement of us is about helping them turn things around, helping them address the problems they have or right the wrongs that they've had in the past. That's our role, right? So yeah, those comments, they really didn't sit well with me at the time. I fought back against them at the time, and I'm happy to say that I didn't end up getting kicked out of those meetings, because that would have been a really bad outcome, I think, for everybody.
Well, and I don't know, maybe when I sit together with all my buddies in the industry that we have, I need to ask them one day. That would be a problem that all environmental consultants face, because at some stage you're going to be called in front of the Land Environment Court. You're going to be an expert witness, and you are on the opposite side of the EPA.
Yep.
So we need to cut in here, because we are now after we have initially recorded this podcast, and by re-listening to it, we came across a few things that we wanna mention here. So of course, we are very much aware that there are guidelines for duty to report and also for material harm that may have not been perfectly clear in our initial recording. But that doesn't mean that there are not borderline issues that we constantly struggle with as a consultancy. But yes, we are aware of the guidelines there. What we were mentioning before is, however, not necessarily covered there. You come across things where you see something has happened here, or something is at least fishy. What is our obligation there?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's important to note again that the main tool that we had to verify the information that we were being given is not fit for purpose, in that it's not precise enough for us to know one way or another so I'm talking about the volumetric surveys and the way that they are used to verify tons that are reported from a weighbridge. The method is just simply not precise enough to know. And so I keep going back to the point that even though we had both sets of information in front of us, there was just simply no way for us to know or look at those two things and say with certainty that they didn't correlate to each other.
Yeah. So James, we've touched on it a little bit already. That has taken not only an enormous amount of your time, which shouldn't be underestimated, because you had just started your own consultancy firm.
Yes. And
you are the key person, and 40, 80 hours a week of consultancy time, and you had to do all this court work as well. So that was an enormous financial and time strain on you. How did that then on top of that comes a price that you paid personally?
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, it was incredibly stressful, and there were many times where you sit for a long period of time not hearing anything back, following interviews and that sort of thing, and you just simply don't know where you stand. When you are in an interview situation and you're somebody like me who places a lot of value on integrity, you sit in that hot seat for a while and it makes you really nervous. It's just a very uncomfortable situation. And so, yeah, there's definitely a mental toll, I think, for people who are innocent bystanders of these sorts of things, who are caught up. But it's certainly a very uncomfortable situation. And at the end of the whole process, even though, so if you look at the judgment, 4 pillars, name and my name, are scattered all the way throughout, which is never a nice thing to see. But at the end of the process, the EPA's view of my involvement was that we had, in fact, done absolutely nothing wrong. I provided affidavits in support of that information that was then used in the EPA's prosecution. So my nervousness was for nothing in the end, but it certainly didn't feel like that, over years and years and years of waiting.
Yeah. Do you think, at least temporarily, aside from the personal impact that it had on you, James, do you think it had an impact on your reputation by just being dragged into this?
I definitely do. Where Four Pillars is and where I am now is at a really good place. And I think that our relationships and reputation among our peers and our clients and the regulators is exceptional. And I'm really, really proud of where we are. To sum up, I guess, yes, I do think it definitely affected things early on. We are well past that now, and we're in a very, very good position. I stand by absolutely everything that I've ever done in my career and the level of integrity that I've shown in my actions. It's unfortunate that some of our clients in the past have found themselves in a little bit of hot water. But again, a lot of the work that we do is trying to prevent that sort of thing happening. And, you've said it before, Gunnar, that we often find ourselves as being the bad guys. Like we have a lot of uncomfortable, difficult conversations with clients where they want to go one way and we say, no, you need to go this way. We're actually allies of the EPA out there trying to get good environmental outcomes by holding our clients to account. But at the end of the day, we don't control our clients.
The company was young and
and
a new kid on the block, but I am also 100% convinced that we are way past that and that we are extremely well respected by the regulators as a source of knowledge and as a source of reason. And as a source of unbiased assessments.
Absolutely.
That reputation not only covers all the regulators, but it also extends clearly to our clients. And look, I mean, we never meant this podcast to be a marketing tool for Four Pillars. But since we were extremely honest about the journey that we have gone through, I think we need to mention how proud we actually are that we've been able to win the Client Choice Award as Best Environmental Firm in our category 2 years in a row. Yeah, but something like this, I mean, I guess that's what we're trying to say here. Something like this can take a personal toll and took a huge personal toll on you.
Yes, definitely did, yeah.
The next thing that it did, it caused a certain amount of brand reputational issues for a brief period of time. That's what happens when you get dragged into something like this.
Yeah.
But we came, of course, out of that. But this is not something to be underestimated by anyone.
It's part of the journey, I think, of a new organization in our space, in that this can happen, and I suppose it's part of my growth as a professional, as part of the growth of Four Pillars as an organization.
Yeah. I don't know. We didn't really, when we started that, we said, let's talk about Bowral. And so we got dragged into these almost philosophical conversations. Look, you get better and get rid of your cold because you sound horrible on a podcast.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody. And the only thing I think that we haven't covered that is why we wanted to record this pod, which is that it is true that I'm part of an elite club, if you want to call it that, of people who have gone through EPA investigations, and I wanted to share my experience. I wanted to share my views on it.
Yeah. I'll let you go and do some work. Have a good one.
Thanks, Gunnar.
Talk to you next time.